So this video is just an uncut video that just is trying to solve this problem. So Jeff is trying to create a property set definition with a list data type. And so he wants to show it in a WPF form, which stands for Windows Presentation Foundation, I believe. And so I want to be able to add property set data and then in the dialog box be able to then change those values. And Jeff has been kind enough to provide an example. So I'm going to go ahead and use that value as my starting point. So to start with, I've opened up Civil 3D and I've opened up the property set define command. And I've added some test property sets or one property set with different types. And so I have a text, integer, true, false, or a list. So I want to be able to kind of duplicate this dialog box or the dialog box you see in the Civil 3D where you can select based on the type. So here I have the type column and I want it to modify whatever value is the header located here. So to do that, I'm going to create objects to hold the property and give it an object class type. So here I have a test model, which has some property sets. And right now they're strings. And I'm going to go ahead and create a class for each one of these values here. And so the first thing I want to do is just change this to observable collection instead of list. And that's going to use the object model. And the observable collection allows Windows to track when items are added or removed to this list, and then reflect that updated change. So instead of using the name, I'm going to go ahead and create an object or a class for the property sets. So I'm going to right click and add a new item or a new class. And I'm going to call this property set model. And that's going to contain my property sets. So I'm going to change this to public. And then there's a base view model that allows you to update various items as things are changing. And so when a property changed, we can call this, and then it'll then do the property change and update the dialog box. So I'm going to go ahead and create a property, and this is going to be name and name. And here I'm using someone else's code. So I have a value here, and the method that I want to call here is on property changed. And that takes the name and then the value, and then it's going to update in the window. So each one of these will then have a property listed here. And so now I want to create a property for each one of these types. So I'm going to go ahead and right click and choose add and create a new class. And this is going to be a property model. And here I'm going to have the same thing, name, and then name. And I want to use the same on property changed. And so if it does change, it's probably not going to change. And so that's just going to be my generic property model. And then each one of them is going to have a name. Maybe I want to add a description later on. And so that's going to be my base property. And then I'm going to go ahead and add in an additional class for text. And I'm just going to inherit the property model. And so that's going to give me the name and description based on the previous value. And then I'm going to create a new property for integer. And then one for true false. And another one for list. And so I'm going to go back in and change these. So the text is going to have a string value. And I'm going to call it value. And I'm going to call this value. And then change this to on property changed. And the type should be bool. And then I'm going to have a list or an observable collection. And I'm just going to use string. No, I'm going to use bool. And this is going to be and then when this gets created, oops, I'm going to go ahead and create that list. And then add true, and then false. And so when the list gets populated, it's going to create this list, and then the user can select it, and it'll modify the value. So I've done the text, I've done this one. Property set model. This is then going to have an observable collection. And that's going to be property model. And I'm going to call this properties. And then my list model is going to have another one. And I'm just going to call this list. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new one called list item model. And if I look in Civil 3D for the list definition, so I have a name and description, and so that's where I'm pulling these values from. And then later on, I can choose which one I want to use. So my list model will then use this item model. And so that'll be my list. And then I need a value for it. And so that's going to be a list item model. I'm going to call it value. And then value. And then on property changed. And then I need to do the same thing for this one. So I imagine this is going to be used to select an object. So then I can change my property set model to have a constructor. And so I can have a property set come in. And so this would be my model, and I need to go get a class because I forget what type it is. And so it looks like we're at creating dummies. So then I need some code to go grab the property sets. So I'm going to, instead of using hard-coded values, I'm just going to go get the property sets. And so I need a transaction, or I'm going to check to make sure I already don't have a transaction open. So I don't. So I need to create a transaction. And then I'm going to commit it, even though I'm probably not going to make any changes. And then let's see if I have this reference in here. I do not. So I need to go ahead and add that reference. So I'm going to go ahead and browse to it and add it. And then I just want to make sure I don't copy it local. So I'll set this to false. And so now I have this here, and now I should have using AEC. And so then I can get each one of the property sets. So I want to loop through it, but it looks like I'm missing a reference to AEC base managed. So I'll go ahead and add that reference as well. Should be in the same folder. Located here. I'll hit OK. And then once again, I want to make sure I don't copy it local. So I'm going to go ahead and get the dictionary from this one. Now I should be able to go through each one of them. And so that's going to be a dictionary entry. And then I can get the property set information. And so that's going to be my property for my property set model. And so I want to bring in the property set definition. And then I want to go through each one of the property set definitions. Under definitions. And so I can go to the definition by right-clicking and going to definition. And then right-clicking and go to this definition. And so it's going to be a property set definition. So now it'll convert the property into the, I'll just call it prop def. And then I want to switch it based on the type. If I can. So I'll just do an if. And I'm going to go through here and just see what type it is and run the code. And so I can then figure out which type it is because it should then tell me. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. I'm going to make sure this drawing is saved, and then I'm going to go ahead and close that. Civil 3D. And then I'm going to go ahead and debug this command. I'm going to fix any errors. And then go ahead and debug this. I don't have a directory there, so I'm going to change this to F. And then hopefully it'll run now. In the output folder, it should tell me where this thing was built to. And so here's the DLL location. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy that so I can net load it. If you get the loader lock, you can click on the exception and search for it and then uncheck it, and then it won't show up again. And then I can do net load and select the DLL. Click always load. And then I can run the command, which is WPF TestGrid. And for some reason, it didn't hit my breakpoint. So here's my property set. And so then I can come in, so create a new one, and then I can see what so I just need to make sure that I use the correct one. So it's property definition. And so when I do that, so I can see it's test one. And so I have a list definition ID, so I can get that information from it. And the data type is located here. So I can do a switch and do prop def. Data type, and then get all of the data types available. And so here I can do and then I can fill in the name. And the description. And the value. Or the description. And then for the value, And I'm going to go ahead and get the default value. And then I can do it from the other ones that I created, which was true, false. I'll just call this TF. And then the error. I'm just going to go ahead and do true. And then I want to add it to the properties. And then I want to do the same thing for the list. And so for this one, I want to populate the list. So I'm just going to call it list. I'm going to need to change this to list model. And so we can see what this returns in object ID. So I'll change this to object ID. So this is the wrong type of object ID, so I'll just go do this. And then I forget what this is. So I don't have graphic, I don't have alpha list, I have true, false. And then I have integer. And I'll just do 1. So I'll just hit play. And so now I'm at my list. And then I can look at the item and look at the DXF code. So I got a list. So the value is list item. And so here I can do name. And then description. And then I want to add it to my list. Which I already did if I was paying attention. And then add it to the properties. And I forgot to create the list. And I'm just going to go ahead and change this to pass the object ID. So I'll go ahead and pass that. And then I'll just take all of this code and move it over to the property list model. And so I'm just going to change this time to object ID. And up here, I'll create the list. And so now I've got the new list. And so that should then populate it. And so that'll populate the properties, hopefully, with the list. I'll check the true false model. So I have that list and I set the value. And then I want to come in here and modify the grid. So I'll go open up the XAML. So I have my data here. And I want to have a way to modify the rows in my data grid. And so my item source. So here I'm going to have my property set definition. So I'm going to go ahead and change that. So in my model, for my test models, I have my property sets. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to a list of property set models. And add it to the list. I'm going to go ahead and change this to prop sets. I'm just going to do first or default in case there's a null. And then the current set is going to be property set definitions. And so I'll go ahead and change this. So here I have the prop sets. I'm going to go ahead and move this over here. I'm going to make sure the window just uses this model instead of using the model. And I'm going to use a different approach. I'm not going to save it here. I'm just going to, if I ever need it, I'm just going to grab it from the data context. And then I have two errors. And I'm going to skip the view model and just go straight to the here. And then my other issue is over here. I'm not using this anymore, so I'm just going to go ahead and comment it all out. You can comment this out. Then delete this. And do the same thing over here. So I'm going to go back to the XAML. And so the property set definitions are going to be this prop sets. And so my item set's going to be prop sets. I'm going to go ahead and change this to selected item. And then I'm going to bind that to the current set. And so the current set, I'm going to go ahead and move this over here. Has properties on it. And so for the data grid, when this combo box changes, it's going to indicate that. And then I want the property set data grid to be bound to that source. So I'm going to grab the current set, and then I'm going to have it bound to the properties. And so when the property set changes, the data grid will update and then show this information. So for my properties, each one of them has a value to it, or a value property. And so I want to pick what the data grid cell is based on that property. So I'm going to go ahead and create a data template selector. And I'm just going to go ahead and put it in here. And I'm just going to call it value because that's what I named the property, and do add. So this is going to inherit the data template selector I'm going to do public. And then I want a data template for each case. So I have integer template, and I'll get and set that. I have list, text, and true false. So list, text, and true false. And then I want to create an override for select template. And so if item is string, I want to return the text template. If the item is int, I want to return the integer template. If it's bool, I want to return the true false template. And then the last one, I'm just going to hard code it in there. So it's just going to return the list template. So it's going to take the object for value, determine if it's a string, int, or bool. And if I go to integer, it's int. If I go to text, it's string. If I go to true false, it's bool. And if it's list, it's going to be whatever the other one is. But I could make it list item model and then return that template. And then I can go back to my XAML. And in the resources, I can select what data template that I want to use. And how I want to set it up. So I'm going to come back here and do, I'm going to call this integer template. Well, I'm going to copy it. I'm going to call this one list template. This is going to be a text box. The item source is going to match the list model. And so I called this list. And then I'm going to change this to selected item. And I'm going to call this value. And then I'll do the same thing for these. This is going to be the text template. And then I'm going to have the true false template. So I got integer. I got the list template. I've got the text template, and I got the true false template. And then I want to call these based on the value or the selector. I'm going to add a reference to it up here. And so I'll do selector. Let's give it a name. So I'll come up here and grab the key. I want this to be value data. And so I'm going to do selector. And so I'll go ahead and do integer, list template, and then true false template. And I'll go ahead and rebuild this. And that should get rid of the error. And so now I have a way to grab the correct template that I want based on the properties. Ideally, you'd have a converter here to change the value from an int or from a string to an int and back and forth. But I'm not going to do that right now. And then I can come down here to my data grid. And instead of doing this stuff, I'm going to go ahead and do a different method. And I don't need these values. I'm not going to use this value. And I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of all of this as well, just so I don't get confused later on. And I don't want this as well, just so I don't get confused. And I want to get rid of that. Cool. No errors. So I'm going to go ahead and add columns in here. And I'm going to provide the name and description. And then I can provide description, just in case I misspelled it. And then here's where I'm going to add the template column. And I'm going to put value. And I'm going to go ahead and add some information in here. And I'm going to add in the resource. Oops. Need to put it in here. And then my template collector name is the prop value selector. And so then it should come in here and apply the correct value to it. So I don't have any errors. I'm pretty sure I messed something up. So I'll hit start. I'll net load. I forget what the command is. So I have the name, description. And so my value isn't showing up. So I just need to make sure or see why that's the case. So I'll just move this over here. I'll come here. Oh, so my data type is incorrect. At least that's what I think it is. So I'll just go ahead and delete that. It also means that something's wrong in my data selector. So let's see if that fixes it. So if we look at the value, right now it's null. And so that's why it's bringing up all these values. And I'm pretty sure I didn't tell it what type of value. So for the last one, it is a list. So to correct the name issue, we can come up here and change this to display name or display member path and do name, and then it'll change it to the name. And so now I have the list and it's going to change it. Here for the property set definitions, I can change that to display member path as well. And it looks like I forgot to populate that value. So I can come over here and change that. And so now that should populate the name in this drop-down list. So I'll just go ahead and test that and close that and then run it again. Sometimes it just takes putting a breakpoint there. And so then I have a value here just to make it show up correctly, or on the first time, I'm just going to go ahead and assign the value to it. And so now the first one is selected. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can fix this by just setting a value in the constructor. Oops. So I'm going to try to make it two-way and see if that resolves the issue. So I'm going to go ahead and change my approach. And in the property model, I'm going to make this an abstract class. And then within here, I'm going to add a property for the value. And I'm going to make it an object in value. And I should make this a, oops. And then I'll change this to on property changed. And then since it's an abstract class, each one of the inherited ones will then so I can then test this. So in here, I changed the true false template to have a combo box with the true false list for the item source and the value. And then in the value data selector, it's now passing the item, but it's a property text value in model for the items, and then it'll turn the correct template. So I'll do net load. And then I'll do WPF DataTemplateSelector. And so now I have the text, the integer, the true false drop down, and then the item. And it's pulling it based on the data template selector for that column for value. And then if you change the property set definition, if I had multiples in here, which I'll go ahead and do, I guess it's not within AutoCAD, which is the profile I've currently set up. But that's how you can do it, or one way of doing it.